The issue of migration has, over the past few years, taken center stage in European, North African and Middle Eastern media. Especially conflicts in Syria and Libya, coupled with political and economic instability in several countries in the Mediterranean, in Sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, have resulted in a large-scale movement of migrants and refugees throughout the entire Euro-Mediterranean region. So we have all seen the stark images depicted in the media of migrants and asylum seekers packed aboard vessels of questionable seaworthiness, risking life and limb to make this treacherous journey across the sea in search of a safe haven or a better future. As well, we have witnessed a range of different approaches to covering migration in the media. Now, numerous reports published by ICMPD have drawn to the fact that the migration narrative in the region is characterized by a strong polarization. Such a divided and confrontational public discourse is very often devoid of a wider understanding of migration. In particular today, in the so-called age of disinformation, it is even harder to achieve a balanced public discussion that is functional rather than, let's say, antagonistic to effective governance, and that reconciles evidence with the need for emotional resonance and that achieves a greater understanding of migration. An important step needed for sure from governments, institutions, news sources, even civil society and big digital platforms is to work together to promote authoritative sources. Otherwise, we always risk that misleading narratives take root and develop a life of their own. That was definitely true before the COVID-19 pandemic and so-called infodemic, and it is certainly truer now as certain categories of migrants, such as irregular migrants in the Mediterranean, are particularly affected by COVID-19 related disinformation and misinformation, since they are already subject to an overly simplistic media framing. Now, I believe that a fair and balanced view of migration in the media is an essential stepping stone towards developing a more, let's call it, nuanced understanding of migration among the general public, as well as contributing to drafting and implementing migration policies that actually work. So, what would be the practical recommendations to foster a balanced migration narrative? Among the many recommendations, let me focus today on 6. So the first one would be to reinforce positive examples and approaches already available. So this would be to promote existing best practice examples and to encourage use of available information and data. In particular, efforts could and should be made to examine whether national initiatives such as the Charter of Rome in Italy and the Greek Charter of Idomeni can be applied in other countries throughout the entire Euro-Mediterranean region. Secondly, to promote exchange of media best practices from countries, for instance, where the migration crisis is most acute, such as Lebanon and Jordan, and other southern Mediterranean countries. Another point would be to encourage journalists, media support groups and media organizations to develop some sort of regional or sub-regional initiatives to improve migration reporting. A second set of recommendations is about training, so invest more in developing comprehensive training programs for media and journalists to encourage ethical reporting, I would say with a focus on, firstly, use of correct terminology, very underestimated, understanding international law and legal rights of migrants, refugees and asylum seekers, avoiding hate speech and political bias when reporting on migration concerns, providing a balanced coverage from the standpoint also of receiving host communities. Ultimately, it'd be beneficial to develop diversity also in sources of information. A third set of recommendations is about media action. So focusing on developing support programs for media organizations and to strengthen their capacity to report on migration issues. In particular, these would include, for instance, the appointment of specialist migration correspondents in as many newsrooms as possible, promoting national media partnerships for coverage of migration. Again, we can also focus on providing special information resources for displaced people from war zones to help them keep in touch with their home communities. Always on training, it's important to encourage newsrooms to move beyond coverage of the migration so-called crisis and move into coverage of issues of integration, and this will assist the normalization of migrants in the public sphere. The fourth set of recommendations would be about supporting policymakers, those who actually make migration policy. So these would be efforts to encourage them and to encourage the community and civil society leaders to play a more active role in creating space, dialogue about migration. In particular, policymakers should examine how they can fund and support better journalism without, of course, compromising the editorial independence of the media. Also, officials and agencies providing information to the media should check facts and verify information, thereby assisting the media to prepare balanced reports. The fifth point, and one very dear to ICMPD, is building dialogues, understanding migration and a culture of civil discourse. And this can foster the promotion and the sharing of information and experience between countries and regional dialogue frameworks by, for instance, organizing national workshops with journalists on specifically the challenges of covering migration in order to share experiences and identify possible joint programs. Furthermore, we can focus on the organization of regional media summits to exchange information on the on the challenges facing journalists and the media in different countries of the region. Also, we can try to find a common approach in the region about combating hate speech, about combating stereotyping, about combating misinformation in public discourse, understanding migration as a process with historical roots in all communities, and valuing independent and inclusive media coverage to create peace and, of course, stability. The last point, which is a key point for the Euromed migration program, is to invest more in research of the role of values in policy communication. What do I mean by that? So throughout the 20th century, psychologists made numerous attempts to classify human values. And while the importance of values as predictors of human attitudes dates back to the 60s, the use of values in communication is today highly debated, but it remains a very poorly defined and understudied field. Values come from numerous psychological and societal factors, for instance, from family upbringing to education, from religious attachment to the history of a person's territory. One of the biggest mistakes that a recent ICMPD report highlights is to delegitimize a community's value or a value shared by a specific target audience as not acceptable or even illegitimate. Now, after defining values and demonstrating their relationship with attitudes to immigration, we can deduce that messaging with a value basis that is concordant with that of its audience is likely to elicit sympathy, whereas that which is discordant with the values of its audience is more likely to elicit antipathy. Given the value-balanced orientations of those with moderate attitudes to immigration, persuasive migration messaging should attempt to mobilize values of its opposition, specifically to the case of migration and following on from the review on the relationship between values and attitudes to immigration. When migration messaging is framed in values of, let's say, self-transcendence like universalism and benevolence, or openness to change, such as self-direction, stimulation, hedonism, it is more likely to be supported by those already favoring immigration. If we look at another type of messaging, when migration messaging is framed in values of conservation, such as security, tradition, or even conformity, or self-enhancement, such as power, or to a lesser extent achievement, it is more likely to be supported by those already opposing immigration. Now, to be most effective, messaging should use the opposite values of those already associated with its argument. This is a highly debated, as I said before, but poorly known field of sociology and communication. But it can definitely represent a turning point in reversing a communication trend where polarization and sensationalism are somehow monopolizing the migration debate in a way that certainly does not benefit neither migrants nor hosting community and make the work of policymakers harder than ever. In these few minutes, these are 6 recommendations on promoting a balanced migration narrative in the Euro-Mediterranean region and beyond today.